Hello and welcome to this mini lecture on education in the USA for the course Culture and Literature 3.1 American Culture and Literature. So the goals today are that you can describe a number of differences between the Dutch and the American educational system, and that you can translate American educational norms to their Dutch counterparts, and you know the current debates that are going on in the American educational system today. So we're going to talk about elementary school, middle school, high school, college and university, funding, standardized testing, and the current state of the American school system. So we're going to start off this lecture with an introduction to the American school system and a few key terms that you have to know that are very different from the British school system that you've studied before, and also other systems that you have, for instance, in the Netherlands. So the first one is, of course, K through 12. That's what we call essentially all primary and secondary education. And in that K through 12, we talk about kindergarten, elementary school, middle school, junior high school, secondary school. And then we also have tertiary education, which is third level education, college, university, and community college. So these are some of the terms that we're going to look up today. Let's start with K through 12. This is the free schooling that everyone in the United States is guaranteed under law. And this starts off with the first year that you go into school, we call kindergarten, and we don't count that year. And generally, almost all American children start at the age of 5. Some may start as early as 6 and are late as 6, and some may start as early as 5. Now, elementary school then is where you go then after kindergarten. That's definitely between the ages of 6 and 12. And in most cases, that's where you start with what we call kindergarten, and then you have first grade, second grade, up until 6th grade. Then you have middle school. Now, in most places, this is between the ages of 12 and 14, so we have that being 7th grade and 8th grade. But it must be known that in certain states, it can start as early as 6th grade, so when you're 11, and it can go as late as 9th grade, so when you're 15. We then have high school, which in most places is the last 4 years. So when you're, so from the age of, let's say, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, around there. But this also always depends on the state. So everyone that you talk to will have a different term. And also the word middle school depends on, in certain places, it's still called junior high school. Although most schools in the United States have changed the name from junior high school to middle school. Now, we look at an important comparison between the Dutch and the American system is essentially that the first off is that Americans count grades all the way from the very beginning until the very end. So you have first grade, second grade, third grade, all the way up until 11th grade and 12th grade. So in Holland, you count from group 1 to group 8 at primary school, and then you have 1 through 4, 5, or 6, depending on what level you're at in high school. American K through 12 is free, as it is in Holland, but there are private schools which cost generally a lot of money. Another one is that most Americans cannot choose, for the most part, where they go to school. It's based on where you live. Now, in certain big cities like New York, you are then in an area, so you can choose from a limited number of schools in the area that you live in. But a majority of Americans are told by their local municipality or their local school district where they have to go to school, and you don't have any choice, and it's always based on where you live. So all children living in one neighborhood all go to the same school. Another one is that there is separation of church and state, which means that religion is strictly forbidden in public schools. So it's really a taboo subject. You can talk about religion as in kind of an anthropological or sociological standpoints. You can talk about, the development of Christianity or Islam or Judaism, but you cannot teach or proselytize. And that's a big difference from the Netherlands, where religious schools make up quite a large minority of all school systems, and that they're 100% free and funded by the state. Now, if we look at the very first school that kids go through, this we call elementary school, and this is K through 6. So this is kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. Elementary school is the term used for primary school in the USA. So you'll hear the term primary because a lot of people know the term. We refer to it as primary education. But elementary is the word that will be used. So this is a big difference with Britain. Now, the focus is almost always on basic skills. So reading, writing, mathematics, science, geography, and history. You also have things like gym and music and singing. And the school day normally lasts for about 7 hours. So the kids generally go to school a little bit later in most places than in high school. So sometimes eight between 8 and 9 o'clock, and it lasts for about 7 hours. So they're there until about 3 p.m. And of course, we have the quintessential American school bus, which is picks the kids up in the morning, and this is a big difference from the Netherlands. So the school bus is used for all three schools, and a lot of schools then start at different times because a district has one set of buses. So high school will start early in the morning. So for a lot of kids, it would even be shocking to the Netherlands. Some high schools can start as early as 7:30 in the morning, and they would go, for instance, until 2:30 in the afternoon. And the reason for that is because the same school buses have to be used for the high schools, then the middle school kids begin, and then the elementary school kids begin latest. Now, after elementary school, children are then brought into middle school. And middle school, which at one time was called junior high school, is kind of a mixture of elementary school and high school. It's this kind of like bridge education that generally in most places only lasts for 2 to 3 years. So it's very similar to the Dutch onderbouw, which means that the kids go and they're kind of in groups. And as I said, it's sixth grade, but almost always seventh and eighth grade, but also sometimes ninth graders. And it's a gap. And the reason why it's a gap is because children in middle schools are almost always kept in school groups. Very similar to the way high schools are dealt with in the Netherlands. So you go into school and you're in a group and you have all of your lessons with the same group of students, but you have different teachers. And so you start getting an introduction to high school classes. So in elementary school, you generally have one teacher, and then you may have a second one every once in a while for things like gym or art. But when you get into middle school, you start having different teachers for each subject. Now, when you get into high school, this is where we start getting that things start changing. So high school starts with 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade. And now you're going to start seeing that we use different terms. So people still say 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade. But the major terms that we use now are, for instance, freshman for 9th graders, sophomore for 10th graders, junior for 11th graders, and senior for 12th graders. And these are the same terms that we also use in college. So if you're in your third year of college, like many of you are, you would say that I'm a junior. So I'm a junior at college or junior at university. Now, in most schools, you're no longer in groups. So you have your own schedule, and each schedule is individual to the person. And every class that you take is with a new group of students. The focus has now moved from, for instance, teaching of these general skills to a lot of times preparing students for tertiary education or college or university. And in many cases, you can choose your own classes, and you do this based on where you're going to go to school. Now, within high school, there are different levels. Now, most schools have 3 to 4 different levels. Now, one of the levels that they have is called special education, and this is for kids that, for instance, may have developmental disabilities that don't allow them to go to follow normal classes. And this really is why high schools and public schools in the United States are seen as community schools, because everyone in the community goes to the same school. So if you have someone who is severely developmentally disabled, has a severe form of autism, someone who has maybe less developmentally disabled but has something, condition like Down syndrome, these pupils also go to school with everyone else. You then have remedial classes, which is for what we would say the general bulk of the student population, and these are the lower level education. You then have standard level education, and then you have advanced placement. Now, each core subject is normally offered in these 3 levels. So remedial, which is low level, standard level, most students take this, and then advanced placement, or AP. And AP often gives you university credits. And the good part about this system is compared to the Dutch system is that you can actually follow technically all 3 levels if you wanted to. So you could, for instance, be really good at mathematics and take mathematics at AP level. But let's say that you're a second language learner and your English really isn't up to par. You could then follow ESL or even remedial English classes at the same time. So it allows a lot of variety. Now, core subjects are history, English, literature, math, and science. And when we look at the AP, which is essentially the form of FABO level, You can see here when we look at all the AP exams, the ones that are most common. So English is, of course, the most common taken AP, followed by United States history, government, calculus, etc. And these are, of course, the AP exams taken in 2019. So you can see the breakup. So some of them, the smallest one, the fewest students took was microeconomics. And of course, the largest one was English language. And English language is on there twice because there are different forms of English language. So you have English composition, which is writing and the traditional use of English language, and then you have English literature. When we look at how grades are given, we all know that you've probably seen it on TV that the American grading system is based by letters. So the letters work with an A, B, C, D, which are essentially students who have passed, and a fail, which means that they failed the course. And what happens is that each class that you take, this A, B, C, D, or F is given a number. And this number is then used to create something called a grade point average, which is essentially your total score of all of the classes that you've taken through high school. And they also use this for college. So if you get A's, let's say, and this could even be like an 8.1, you would then get 4 points. And if you do an 8.1 or higher for all of your classes in high school, you have what's called a 4.0 grade point average. Let's say that you do all A's and you do 1 or 2 B's, then you would get, for instance, something like a 3.9, etc. And if we look at the Dutch equivalent, we can see here that A is generally an 8.1 to a 10, B is from 7.1 to an 8, C is from 6 to 7, D is from 5.5 to 5.9, and a fail is, of course, anything from 0 to 5.4. It's important to remember that in courses that you need to take in order to study, a lot of times a D does not count. So if you're wanting to go, for instance, to university to become an English teacher, if you get D's for English, that would, of course, in many cases, disqualify the classes. Now, high school is kind of a strange place for American pupils because it requires that the student, the child, at quite a young age has to know what they want to do in college. And the reason is that you have a lot of autonomy in the classes that you're allowed to choose. So when you're going to school, you can choose to take essentially any class that you want. The school has basic requirements that you need to get your high school degree. So in many schools, that would be, for instance, 2 years of English, 2 years of history, 2 years of math. But if you want to go to college, your college is going to actually require that you take certain classes and that you get a certain grade on your final exam or your college entry exam. So what they do is when you turn about 15 years old and you leave this level where you're doing the basic classes that you need to get your high school degree, you have to start understanding around 15, 16 where you want to go to school and what you want to study. So if we look here at 2 different universities, state universities in the middle of the country, so these are very large universities. One is my alma mater, the University of Missouri, and the other one is a very close university, the University of Nebraska. You can see here that this is what they require in order to study English. So if you want to study English there, these are the requirements that the different universities have. So for instance, both universities require 4 years of math, 4 years of English, and 3 years of science. And this is generally the case for most people that study humanities when they go to university. You then have to have 2 years of a foreign language, 3 years of social studies, and of course the University of Missouri then also requires that you have at least 1 year of fine arts, so drawing, photography, etc., music. We then have the SAT or the ACT, which is the score that you take at your final exam. So the University of Missouri requires a little bit higher. That's 1160 on the SAT or 24 or higher on the ACT. You see that that's a little bit lower for the University of Nebraska. And these requirements would be different for each study. So if you wanted to study, for instance, to become a doctor or a nurse, or if you wanted to study something like biology, you then may have less English, but of course more science. If you wanted to study something like sociology or pre-law, you would have more social studies and possibly less science. Now, what you actually do when you study is you study for this exam. So you're essentially doing 3 things while you're going to university, while you're going to college in high school. The first one is you want to get really good grades because you want your grade point average to be high. A lot of really prestigious universities require that students have like a 3.8 or a 4.0, so that in high school, all 4 years, they never got a grade below the Dutch version of an 8.1. the prestigious schools like Harvard, Yale, etc. This is essentially if you don't get the highest in your class, then you're not going to pass. Another thing that you have to study for is your SAT or your ACT. The third one is, of course, you have to have extracurricular activities. So a lot of universities require that students are also active in their communities or parts of clubs or do athletics. Now, the SAT or ACT depends on essentially where in the country you live, whether you take the SAT or the ACT. These are essentially our versions of kind of the central exam. But unlike in the Netherlands, a student must complete it as a final exam. The exam is offered on Saturdays, and the student can take it as often as they want. So a lot of students actually start taking it when they're juniors, when they're in 11th grade, because they want to see what their score is. And some students may even take it 2, 3, 4 times to get their highest score. There's no requirement to pass, so it's just it's more like an intelligence test. And unlike the Dutch VWO or HAVO system, you only take it in certain subjects. So you only take it in a lot of places in classes, for instance, in English reading, in language, in mathematics. Sometimes they use something called scientific reasoning, and these are essentially the aspects of the SAT and ACT that you have to know. So you're not going to take it on every subject that you've taken, and everyone takes the same exam. So what I want to do really quickly is I want to look at SAT, a sample writing question. So this is a question for the SAT, and as you can see here, you then read a text, and then after you read the text, you then have to you have to decide, for instance, and this is for the exam for English composition, you have to decide whether there should be no change or whether the underlying text should be changed to one of the following. So I want you to, let's read it really quickly, and then I want you to pause and see what you think of this exam. So let's start. The main environmental problem caused by the production of Greek yogurt is the creation of acid whey as a byproduct. Because it requires up to 4 times more milk than conventional yogurt does, Greek yogurt produces large amounts of acid whey, which is difficult to dispose of. To address the problem of disposal, farmers have found a number of uses for acid whey. They can add it to livestock feed as protein, and then here we have question 2, supplement, and people can make their own Greek-style yogurt at home by straining regular yogurt, or you can change it to supplement and convert it into gas to use as fuel in electricity production. Supplement, while sweet whey is more desirable as a food additive for humans, or supplement which provides an important element of their diet. So here you have to decide kind of what the essence is of sentence 4. So they can add it to livestock feed as protein. So we see here that it has to deal with livestock protein, which means that the sentence itself should really be about livestock. So if we look at them here, and people can make their own Greek-style yogurt, we can see, yeah, that doesn't make sense. You have one sentence that is essentially talking about 2 different aspects, which is poor composition. You can say, for instance, supplement it and convert it into gas to use as fuel in electricity production, which is once again talking about 2 different subjects. They can turn it and use it as a protein supplement, while sweet whey is more desirable as food additive for humans, or D, supplement, which provides an important element of their diet. We can see that question D is the most appropriate answer, because question D, or answer D, sorry, allows us to know that the question is about, of course, livestock feed. And so the sentence begins with livestock feed, so the whole sentence should be about livestock feed, whereas the one that's there right now deals with 2 different subjects, and so does B and C. So D is the correct answer. Now, what I want you to do for an activity is you're going to look at pages 185 and 187 in your book. And this deals with Common Core. So Common Core, once you read about this in page 185, was established within the last decade, essentially, as a way to ensure that all American schools and all American students of all ages have the same level of education. And this was because you have a very large school system with millions of pupils attending free schools, and yet in different states they were teaching different things and the learning outcomes were completely different. So Common Core is a set of learning outcomes that they use every few years, specifically for language, mathematics, and reasoning. So what I want you to do right now is read on pages 185 to 187 about Common Core, and then I want you to think about how Common Core English standards for 12 to 14-year-olds different from the L1 standards or Dutch standards in your own country. Do you think that these standards are too hard or are they too easy? And what do these standards say about differentiation between various levels? So these standards are blanket. So what does that say about students that are possibly very advanced or that are slow in their development? Pause it and read that section. Now, the next level of college that we're dealing with, or the next level of education, is college or university. And the term, as you hear, that I've used it several times, is interchangeable. And this is also different from Britain. So in Britain, when you look at a university is normally broken up into several colleges. And this is also the case at most universities in the United States. So if you have a university, you would then attend a university, and then each university would have a different college. You would have a College of Art and Sciences, a College of Economics, a College of Medicine, or a School of Medicine, sometimes they're called. But Americans essentially use the term college more often than university, but they're essentially the same. Now, colleges in the United States are extremely expensive. So the average tuition per year is $9,970. That is a large amount of money. Now, what a lot of students do is they go to then something called a community college, which offers an associate's degree, which is something that we could possibly say is between an MBO and a HBO. So if you did an MBO level 4 and you did something, for instance, that had to deal with, a technical study, that would actually be the same as a community college. So people that go to community colleges that become like nurses, or people who go to community colleges and work in some form of what in American English we call engineering, meaning that they're going to be mechanics that work on cars or on large machines or air conditioners or heating. Those are all people that go to community college, and they get an associate's degree. But a lot of people that go to community colleges go there because you can go to community college, which is very cheap, and you can go there for 2 years, get your associate's degree, and that essentially takes away 1 to 1.5 years of university. So once you get your associate's degree, it allows you to go to a university, and you've completed the first year to year and a half completely free. Now, the reason why that is because when most people go to colleges and universities in the United States, your first year, you almost study nothing to do with what you want to study in the end. So if you want to study English, you're going to be taking a lot of classes that have nothing to do with English, and that's because bachelor levels there are slightly different. So in Holland, when you go to HAVO or VWO, you have a very specific degree. So you get what you of course call the profiel. So if you're studying something that's mensenmaatschappij or technique, you then learn things about biology at a very high level. But high school in the United States is more generalized education. So you get, as you saw, things like art, photography, painting. You can take all of these different individualized courses. That means that your first year at university is always going to be general ed. So you have to take a course in history, sociology, English, political sciences, natural sciences, and you really start in your second, third, and fourth year where you essentially work on your main program. So a lot of people choose to go to community colleges for 1 to 2 years to get all of those courses out of the way. They get their associate's degree, and then they move on to a university where they then have another 2.5 to 3 years to study. Now, American schools are very expensive, and that's because there are a lot of prestigious universities, and that's because the professors that work there can often get paid a large sum of money. Not always. So if we look at, for instance, the best universities in the world, we can see that Oxford in the UK, another expensive university, is at the top, and Cambridge. But for the rest, almost all of the best universities in the world are American. And so this then leads us to the question of why America has the best universities and some of the best students and the best thinkers in the world, yet many of the schools are failing. Now, this has to deal with something that's called educational inequality. And so for your final assignment that you're going to look at is we're going to be looking at inequality in American education. And what you're going to do is you're going to essentially read the following sections in the textbook. And this is very important for understanding the current debate around education. So Group 1 is going to read how American schools are funded on page 181 to 184. Group 2 is going to read the debate around standardized testing, pages 185 to 187. And Group 3 will read the state of American schools between pages 188 and 190. So if you're doing this individually, you'll have to read all of them. And you're going to essentially, for each one of these sections, write a little statement that explains how this topic has affected inequality in American education. So Group 1 would write how funding for schools has created inequality. Group 2 will write how standardized testing has created inequality. And 3 will talk about the state of the American schools right now and how that's led to testing inequality. So pause this or do this activity later. Now, finally, there's a good discussion to be had about standardized testing. And this is what we call teaching to the test, which is, I would say right now, one of the biggest debates that's going on in American schooling system. Because every few years in the US, you have to take these standardized tests. And unlike the CETO, they really don't matter that much to the student. So if you're a 12-year-old or if you're an 8-year-old and you're taking one of your state standardized tests, it really doesn't matter to you because it isn't going to affect your outcome. But it's very important to the schools. And because of this, it's led to this system that's called teaching to the test, which we also have examples of in the Netherlands. Now, teaching to the test means that you have a test and that your entire curriculum is based only for getting that pupil to the test. Now, if we think about this in educational terms, we can sometimes say that this is a problem with what we can solve with what we call constructive alignment, meaning that the testing doesn't necessarily match up with the school's learning outcome, and that it also then has an effect on the curriculum, the educational, the activities that the pupil is then experiencing every single week. So what you want to look at here is how teaching to the test works in the United States, but also think about how it works in Holland. How much of elementary school in the Netherlands do you think is based on preparing students for the CETO test? And how much of education, for instance, English education, is centered around focusing on the central exam? And if you look at the amount of reading that has to be done in Dutch English classes, because the central exam is, of course, a reading exam. So this is something that you want to look at because this is definitely a topic that we can have on the exam. Now, this is the end of this little mini lecture on education. If you have any questions, you can discuss them with your teacher in class.